Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a creepy collection of attic stories for your listening pleasure. The Patreon promotion where I send you some vinyl stickers, paper stickers, a letter in the post, and all the exclusive and amazing content you get on Patreon is coming to a close soon. If you're interested in some or all of these things, be sure to check the link out at the top of the description. It ends on the 15th. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Close your attics, and let the darkness take control. I was at my friend's old house, since my friend and I were sitting in the attic just hanging out. My back was pressed up against a secret door that led to a secret room that my friend used for storage, when all of a sudden something hit the door 3 times super hard, and I felt it on my back, so I jumped and opened the door and looked inside, thinking it was my friend, but there was nothing, so I laughed it off. My friend and I thought it must have come from upstairs, and as I began to close the door and turn the latch that locked the door, something hit the door so hard it broke the latch completely and the door swung open, and there was nothing there. But I distinctly remember a strong smell of musty potatoes. The same house on another day. Me and my friend for some reason decide to move his couch and TV into the fireplace room underneath the secret room to play some PlayStation. We couldn't get the TV to work, so we said, screw it, let's go get some cheeseburgers from down the street, and then we'll come back to get it working. When we arrived back, the door was closed, and something was holding it shut. There was no lock, but the door was latched, and we couldn't open it. So I went outside and around the house to climb in the window of that room. I looked into the window and saw that the couch was on its side and pushed up against the inside of the door, along with some boxes so that it was held shut. I remember feeling goosebumps when I saw it. Anyway, I opened the window, and as soon as I stuck my head through the window, something said really loud and in my face, "Get out!" It was almost like I could feel its breath, and it had the same musty potato smell from the previous experience. I've never felt such terror in my life, and afterwards told my friend's dad. He casually said to us, yeah, the ghost doesn't like it when we go into that room much, so stay out. It was bloody freaky to say the least. My wife and I were staying at my father's house after he passed away. Everyone in the family spoke about the house being haunted for as long as I can remember. But personally, I never had anything weird prior to this, and overall just chalked it up to that side of the family having an overactive imagination. We were at the house for around a week to help clean it out, as it was around 6 hours away from where we lived. There were several weird events leading up to the final event that changed myself and my wife forever. The house itself was a postage stamp style Victorian house with 2 floors and a semi-finished apartment style attic. So I was going up to the attic to work on cleaning out some stuff my father had up there. He was an avid collector of NASCAR diecast and other collectibles, and things were everywhere. On my way up the steps, I was on the phone with my wife, who had went to get food, when I saw the handle on the attic door twist and the door open slightly. The area we were in was not necessarily dangerous, but was far from nice. I instantly thought someone had broken in and immediately ran up to investigate. I searched everywhere and couldn't find anyone, so that was quite alarming. For the second event, myself, my wife, and the childhood friend were in the same attic cleaning out items. In the attic, there was a thick old shag carpet that must have been there since the 70s, and since it was a semi-finished attic, one room was for storage, and that's where my buddy was working. I look at my wife, who literally just points at the door. We both watch in horror as the door for the room slowly closes on my buddy by itself. There was zero reason or explanation. We both saw it, and the door itself took a large amount of force to actually close. Obviously, my buddy was pretty unhappy, and we both just said, "Oh, sorry, forgot you were there," to avoid him thinking that we were both losing our minds or trying to scare him. However, it all culminated in the last event. The last night we ever stayed there, we slept on the second floor in the master bedroom. The bedroom itself was positioned so that the headrest of the bed's wall was aligned with a set of stairs coming up. The wall and stairs were about 3 to 15 feet difference in height, depending on the location, an important piece to what ended up happening. Throughout the night, my wife kept waking me up to say someone was walking around on the platform landing outside. I look and did see what looked like a shadow under the doorframe, so I immediately opened the door and braced for what I assumed was an intruder. Again, nothing. And after searching the house extensively, there was still nothing. Later that night, I'm awoken to the sound of scratching on the wall behind my head. My wife is already awake and looking at me oddly as she hears it too. I assume it's just a rat or some kind of animal. While weird, it was directly behind me and would not be far-fetched as the house did have critters in it. In a tired rage, I turned around and just punched the wall to scare whichever animal it was off. And within a second, something punches back with such force it shakes the entire wall. Then we both heard footsteps and stomping running away from us and up the attic stairs. At this moment, we are both at a loss for words and immediately pack up with our son and leave. We call out the police and just assume it has to be someone who broke in, until the next day when we start to think about it. The area where the scratching had occurred was above the steps, a good 10 feet, and even an extremely tall man would have trouble reaching with a ladder. However, even if they could reach, what we couldn't explain is how this thing ran on a floor that literally does not exist. The sound of running was not going up the steps, but as if there was a hallway or floor directly behind the wall, which there wasn't. The police found no signs of a break-in or any intruder being there. The security cameras outside never had any alerts or saw anyone come in. So much so, we ended up selling the house with everything in it and never stayed there again. I came down briefly a few weeks later to finish up, and just went to tell my father goodbye at the house. Upon entering, the house felt so hateful. I don't understand how a house could have feelings, but if someone were to ask me what it felt like, hateful would be the word I used. I have no idea to this day what any of it was. And to clarify, had I not been in such a state of grief, I would not have investigated this stuff after the first event. My dad always brushed off the other family members claiming it to be haunted as no big deal, and even in my childhood years visiting, I never once had an odd experience. My dad and I had a good relationship throughout his life, and he never spoke about the house in a negative manner. The house was built by a French family in 1879 and was acquired by my family in 1952, some 70 years later. And since then, until my father's passing, nothing traumatic ever happened, nor weird family events. It was just a plain old boring house, which just adds to the mystery. To this day, my wife and I still cannot talk about these events without getting chills. My family and I moved into this house when I was 6. That's my parents and myself and my sister. When we first moved, I hated it here. I was constantly afraid, hearing weird noises and seeing shadows from the corner of my eye. There was one occasion when I was in the shower, and as I was shampooing, I heard someone breathe next to my ear. As you can imagine, the color rapidly drained from my face, and in fear, I jumped out the shower, naked, with shampoo all over my head, and ran downstairs crying to my mum in fear. I would have friends over, and when we were left alone in the house, we would also hear things and be scared. Almost the whole home is wood flooring, and we'd hear creaks and crackling like someone was walking around. Throughout our time in this new house, I found out that my parents were hearing music coming from the attic while they're in bed. Piano music, sometimes radio music. My father is someone who never takes crap from anyone, and I've never seen him be afraid of anything. So he would walk right up and pull the attic stairs down and check it out. As soon as he got to the top of the steps, the music would stop. He would check the whole attic and there was nothing that could produce music in there. In my high school years, I would go to bed and lock my door at night. Stupid, I know, but my dad wasn't one to knock, and I was often doing things I shouldn't. One night, I'm awoken in the middle of the night, and I'm a fairly deep sleeper. My doorknob was being shaken violently. Seeing the hour, I jumped out of bed and unlocked it, immediately assuming it was my dad and something was wrong, but no one was there. I go back to sleep thinking I must have been dreaming or something. This happened a total of 2 to 3 times over a fairly large span of years. I've also had knocks on my door in the middle of the night and early morning. My usual response is, yeah, but no one enters. I open the door, no one there. The last isolated incident I can remember was in 2016. I was working at a salon and the owner's daughter, who I became quite close to, died of an overdose. Our birthdays were only 3 days apart and we'd always celebrated together at the salon. She had passed away in January and it was her birthday that night. It was late, between 1 or 2 a.m, and I was on the toilet in my bathroom and happened to think about her. I said out loud, "Happy birthday, Bonnie." And boom, I start hearing wild piano music above me in the attic. I freak out hard, ran downstairs and woke up my mum, who was asleep on the couch, because my parents no longer slept in the same bed. This is when she told me about the music when I was a kid. 2 weekends ago, there was nothing good on TV on Sunday, so I put on Unexplained. It's a ghost hunting show with qualified people doing the hunting. I kind of like the thrill of being scared and watching stuff like that, but I don't like it in my own home. My mum and I watched for a few hours until I went to pick up food and took our car because it was easier. There was this water bottle in the back seat of her car swishing around making noise. I had been in her car the day before, running hours worth of errands, and didn't notice it at all. I felt a strange presence and scaredness while I drove, and told myself I was just creeping myself out because I'd watched the show. That night, I go to bed, and wake up at 9 a.m. with 4 soft knocks on my bedroom door. I assume it's my mum and say, "Yeah?" But there's nothing. I go back to sleep for an hour or 2, and wake up later and asked if she knocked on my door this morning. She said she hadn't. So the very next night I go to sleep. I have this old Harman speaker and bass set in my bedroom. It's 4 a.m. and the thing is humming, loud and creepy. Each one of the tones sound like it's more and more echoey or getting closer. I quickly turn on my phone's flashlight and it stops immediately. I've grown older in this house, and for a very long time I stopped feeling scared. Was watching the show the sort of gateway for the spirits to start telling me they're still here? I don't know. Personally, I just really hope none of this creepy stuff ever happens to me again. This all occurred 5 years ago. I had a friend in high school called Dexter, and I was very good friends with him for a long time. I was having some issues at home, and had developed some anxiety due to it. So I was at his house as much as I could, as a place of comfort. I never experienced any weird stuff for at least a few months into knowing him. But as time progressed, that all changed, and progressively, things got worse and worse. I refuse to go over to his house now, and our friendship has drifted due to this. Keep this in mind. I don't believe there was a ghost in his house. I believe there was something far more dark and sinister, and I want to elaborate on that. A bit about Dexter and his family that I think personally attributed to whatever haunted this house. So, they were slobs. I mean, their house was filthy and disgusting. The more I got to know Dexter and his family, the more I realized how negative they all were, especially Dexter, who I was friends with at the time. Best friends, in fact. His dad was an addict, and so was Dexter, an addict to weed, alcohol, food, smoking, anything, it didn't matter. They lacked any semblance of self-control. This, I believed, was the main cause. I got Dexter into PC gaming, and let's say that he isn't too clever with his browsing history, and I accidentally stumbled onto some particular tastes he has. Very odd, specific tastes that I don't want to really go into. I'm no prude, so trust me when I say I doubt his taste is anything you've ever looked up late at night. I started to realize over the months that we were spending together every day, almost all day, that Dexter was a dark person, full of jealousy, hatred, selfishness, and, objectively speaking, a dumb person. He didn't really try to hide his vices. I found a lot of disturbing things in his room, and in closets in the house. I kept everything to myself, and he ended up telling me about his problems with his taste years later, and we both experienced a paranormal event that night, but this is a long and different story entirely. I think it's important to note that I was raised Christian, hold Christian beliefs, but I'm generally a bad Christian, and I've struggled with my faith and following what I believe. This hypocritical conviction, I believe, played a significant role in my haunting. His family attended a cultish church that partakes in holy laughter and speaking in tongues, something I was raised to believe was fulsome wrong. Whatever was haunting that house only haunted me, and still to this day, Dexter and his family think I made everything up. So let's get into the experiences. It must have been around 6 months into being there every day, but it might have been sooner. I started keeping my gaming PC at Dexter's house after knowing each other for a few months. This came after some other stuff that happened at home, and when Dexter wasn't home, I would hang out there alone and chill after school. I basically lived there. I kept all of my stuff in his small guest room, which shared a wall with Dexter's room. The first experience I had was playing CSGO and heard what sounded like footsteps directly above my head. To give context to people who don't know what that is, it's a competitive game that requires a lot of focus, so even though I could hear these sounds above my head, I just ignored them. It was the first time I would hear footsteps that would become all too familiar. They sounded like pirate boots on a boat, if you'd ever heard of Pirates of the Caribbean, dramatic large thuds with each step. The sound persisted for at least 10 minutes off and on, before abruptly stopping, which was immediately followed by the closet door, a thin, sliding plywood door an arm's length away from me, being hit from the inside hard. Imagine a small child were to run into a door. The desk my monitor was set on shook, and I just was baffled and stuck in my chair from pure fear. I stared at the sliding door, waiting for it to open, but it became quiet, with no footsteps. It scared me to the point where I just sprinted out the room and to the front of the house, where I stayed until Dexter got home. I told him what happened, and he didn't think much of it. He went into the room and he slid open the door. Nothing. I searched the whole closet. No holes that rats could have come out of, only a few empty cardboard boxes. From this point, it became a norm for me to hear footsteps directly above my head, but only whenever I was there alone. The footsteps would follow me through the house, and occasionally I would stop, and they would stop right above my head. And if I stayed still long enough, they would stop. I can't emphasize enough how much they matched my movement. And this may sound odd, but they reacted to my thoughts. I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to move in 3, 2, 1, and before I actually moved, the footsteps would stomp around and walk in circles. It was horrifying, and I seriously could not explain it to myself. This was disturbing to me, but I really didn't have anywhere else to go, so I just ignored it and chalked it up to rats or something. This phenomenon would happen every few days when I was alone in the house, and each time it made me so scared and made me feel so alone. Fast forward a year, I'm laying in bed, it's Saturday morning, and I'm there in the house alone in the guest room. Dexter is at work, his parents aren't home, and it's 11 a.m, and I'm scrolling mindlessly on my phone. Breaking the dead silence instantly, I hear footsteps in the attic, but this time running from across the house very aggressively to exactly over my head. I remember it vividly. The running stopped right over my head, and I just laid there in fear and in silence. The footsteps seemed like they were angry, and for the first time I felt a presence. It's hard to explain, but imagine your eyes are closed and someone gets very close to your face, even though you can't see nor hear, that you can sense them. That's how it began to feel with this thing. I would sense it before I heard it. I became very acute to its presence over the years. It was a good 2 minutes before I went to get out of bed, and then, exactly as I had mentioned with the footsteps to the thought of myself moving, a loud crash directly above me right where I was looking straight into the ceiling from the attic. It was as if you were deadlifting 150 pounds and then threw it to the ground as hard as you could. I immediately sprinted out the house, except this time I walked home because I knew it would be hours before anyone would return. This is where I began dreading sleeping at his house. What is in his attic? I became obsessed with the question. I told Dexter this and he nonchalantly wrote it off as animal. But as much as I explained it to him that it reacted to my thoughts, he just didn't think much of it. A few days after this, we were in his garage, where there is an entryway to his attic. I convinced him to get a ladder and see what we can find there. I went up first and shined a deep light into the darkness of the room. I couldn't see anything, and no amount of money on earth would compel me to enter this room. Something about it was just wrong. I, however, saw a black box, right in the back corner of the attic, right above the guest room. I think this box was what was dropped over my head days previously, and I had Dexter look at it, and he saw it as well. In hindsight, I wish we had gone over to look at what was in the box. At this point, I want to clarify that I'm completely stable, have no history of schizophrenia nor insanity in my family, and am an extremely rational person, and up until this point, had no interest nor belief in ghosts, spirits, or demons. I want to preface this because things get a little crazy now. So Dexter had a dog called Patrick. Patrick and I were best buds. He was truly an extraordinary dog. I loved him with all my heart, and he comforted me in my lowest moments since it was hard then, and I never really opened up to anyone. When I experienced all of these things happening to me, Patrick was there with me. So when I say alone, I wasn't really. In fact, I think if Patrick wasn't there, I would not have been able to endure it. He was with me every single time I'd walk to get water or go to the bathroom, made food, and the loud, horrifying footsteps would come back instantly over my head. It was basically a jump scare that would come randomly, and it made me very paranoid and hesitant to move around the house. It was an abusive being that enjoyed haunting me and toying with me. Dexter and his family left for a week to go on vacation and asked me to take care of Patrick. At this point, I had 2 computers. I kept one at Dexter's and one at my own, and things had subsided a bit at my house, so I didn't spend every night at Dexter's anymore. I went over to Dexter's house every day, played with Patrick and fed him, and I would hang around there for a few hours and head home. 3 days after Dexter's family left, I walked into their house and Patrick is freaking out, barking at something in the middle of his living room. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't. He's snarling and barking as if something was in the middle of the living room. Finally, after what seems like 5 minutes, he relaxes a bit, but still on guard, and follows me to his food bowl, and then into the guest room, where I played some games. I didn't feel a presence or hear any footsteps, which was a rarity. I leave, and the next day I come over to the same thing. Patrick is freaking out, this time far more aggressively. He's moving around the living room, but his gaze and posture is poised around the center of the living room as he moves around it. I feel the presence this time. As I watch Patrick bark and whimper and freak out, I try and listen. I listen intently for a few minutes and swear I didn't move a muscle. Patrick calmed down and looked at me, as if he knew I was just standing there listening. Finally, I think, all right, I don't hear anything. Maybe Patrick is just upset that Dexter and his family are gone. This is the first time they'd left since I'd known them, and they spent a lot of time in the living room together. As I barely moved an inch, there was a huge boom above my head. I jumped at least 5 feet into the air. Stomping, jumping, and clawing on the floor above my head, Patrick starts to freak out and starts to almost attack the air in the middle of the living room. I am thoroughly freaked the hell out, so I run over to Patrick's food bowl, pour a lot of food, and run out of the house. It was around this time that I realized I really just do not ever want to be in this house again, alone or not. The next 2 or 3 days I go over there, Patrick is still freaked out, but not barking or anything related to the living room, so I quickly fed him and left. On the last day before Dexter and his family came home, something happened. I entered the door and immediately feel this presence. It's almost as if the air itself gets humid and thick. I'm on guard, and Patrick is crying this time. He is literally crying, jumping on me and whimpering as I enter the door. I take 1 step into the door, and a loud footstep right above me. The first step I took into the house, I had gotten almost annoyed with this thing at this point. It didn't bother to stop and listen. I just headed straight to his food bowl. I walked over to the side room where it's kept, and it's missing. The food bag, which is heavy and zipped, is sitting right there. The bowl is missing. I look around, and as I walk around the house, I hear the footsteps following me in the attic above. Patrick is whimpering and every few seconds barking. I walk back out the living room, and what I saw next has literally changed my life forever. Patrick's food bowl is sitting directly in the middle of the living room, right where Patrick had been barking and attacking the air a few days prior. It was completely full of food. In fact, it was overflowing, as if it was a message. I knew why you were coming here. I remember walking backwards slowly out the house, stunned. I could not believe my eyes. I shut the door and got into my car. I forgot to mention I drove over with my girlfriend and it was late. She knew about Dexter's house and the things I've experienced there. She said I was as white as a sheet, and apparently had tears streaming down my face. Before I even said a word, I had the car pulling out the driveway and she frantically was asking what happened. It was at that moment I decided I would never go to his house alone again. Dexter and his family came back and I told them what happened. His mum looked at me like I was joking, and she half listened to me, half listened to the TV show she was watching. I told his dad that maybe a homeless person was living in their attic and that he has to look in there. He finally accepted. He and Dexter and I went to the garage with the ladder, and his dad peered into the attic with a flashlight. He said there's nothing in there, and I said, in the back right corner there's a black box. No, there's not. Dexter and I look at each other, and for the first time, I think Dexter looked a bit scared. He saw the black box himself. Dexter and I told his dad about the box, and I told him that it was thrown at the ceiling floor when I was in the house alone. He didn't care. He simply shut the attic door, climbed down the stairs, and put the ladder back. I told Dexter that I was done sleeping at his house, and I was done staying there at all, period. I told him that if he wanted to come over to my house, that's fine, but I was going to take my computer home, and that was that. He was super pissed, but I told him that over the years he never took me seriously and I was done. It simply was too scary to be there, and after spending so much time there and enduring a lot of hardships in my own personal life, I associated the horror of that house with the anxieties and worries in my own life. Throughout sharing this, I remembered so many other things that happened to me in the house, but I think you get the point. Leaving the house for good was a life-changing decision. I don't know why these things happened to me, but in a weird way it made me feel a stronger person, because I had to decide I was done and I didn't care how I made Dexter feel. My whole life I never cared about myself first, and this was the first time I did. I've been back over since and vowed to never go again, and in the short time I go over, I still feel a presence there. But Dexter was a good friend, and he struggles with a lot of his own demons, so when he begs me to come over for a few hours, I do. I tried to spend the night one more time, and the sliding closet door was ran into again like the first time I was falling asleep. But this completely solidified my decision to never stay the night there again. I learned things about Dexter after all this went down that made a lot of the evil in the house make much more sense. Dexter is a disturbed and confused person and his family has a history of disturbing and sinister events. Whatever it is in his house has forever changed my life and my views on the unexplainable. I also want to add I should have taken Patrick. I think that something that sharing this made me realize was that there are a lot of reasons why I couldn't, but I should have tried. I had the only key to his house, all the doors were locked, and I would have known if the house was broken into. When I saw the food bowl, I literally just couldn't think straight. It was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life, and I just walked backwards out the house while I looked at it. He was barking in the living room when I shut the door and locked it, and I remember exactly the way he jumped and barked as I closed the door, as if I was looking at a picture. I could hear him barking as I walked to my car. My girlfriend was so confused as to why I walked backwards. She was laughing. Then I got in and she saw I was crying. I didn't even realize until we were out the driveway, and I regret not taking him a lot. Leaving the house was the best decision of my life, and I hope that when I left, it left too, and it would leave Patrick alone. I believe there's a possibility my house is haunted. We don't actually know how old the house itself is. It was in New York. Apparently the building that held the records burnt down in 1924, so that's just how old they say everything is. The previous owner moved in when he was 5 and then died on the property in his early 90s in the early 2000s. Move-in day, I'm resting in one of the upstairs rooms and hear a loud, angry stomping in the attic over the room to the right of me. My husband hears it from downstairs. That would be 2 stories below. I wonder what the hell the problem is. He thought I was making the noise and comes up asking me what the hell is wrong. I told him it wasn't me, and we both shrugged. So I went up to the attic to investigate. There was nothing but an old toilet, a box of old photos in the corner with a trunk of honest-to-God Nazi stuff, like a 30-inch by 2-inch banner, an armband, a helmet, a freaking grenade, and there was an American pilot helmet too. Researching, I discovered the previous owner helped liberate some town in France. The banner used to go across the road, and the armband was from an enlisted person according to the type of stitching. We had house guests over one at a time, and they heard the stomping too. It's unmistakable, loud and angry running stomping stuff in the stairway of the attic, over the toilet and in the corner. We jokingly referred to the ghost as Moaning Myrtle. That night in the house, a guest said someone was choking her as if she was falling asleep. She said it felt like being choked and smothered at the same time, like her weight was being poured inch by inch over her body. She asked if I knew if anyone had been strangled and then poured cement onto, and I sincerely freaked out. The guest room happened to be directly under the photo area in the attic, so as you can imagine after that, I blessed and anointed the house. Thankfully, we never had another creepy incident following that. I used to live in the upstairs apartment at my uncle's house. The front door to the apartment was right next to a door that led to the attic. My door also only had a handle lock. One night something woke me up at around 3:30 a.m. I realized it sounded like footsteps and figured it was an animal and passed back out. The next night the same thing happened, but louder. It sounded like someone was stomping down the attic stairs and pounds on my front door. As you can imagine, I have never been so terrified in all my life. I called my buddy until he answered and stayed there for a few nights. Unfortunately, there's no real resolution to this story. I just hope that whatever it is eventually gets bored and goes away. A few years back, I was sitting in my living room and felt a really cold chill just slowly roll down my shoulders and back. And then seconds later, feeling pressure on my right shoulder, like someone had just put their hand on there. I freak out and ran to the kitchen, but as soon as I got near the table, my body completely froze, like it was unable to move. I felt the hand come back, but this time it was wrapped around my neck, and I was struggling to breathe. It felt like I was there for ages, but in reality was probably only 30 seconds, just spluttering and trying to breathe in. Once it went away, I ran straight up to my room and stayed under the covers of my bed. It was around 3:30, and I was freaked out by what happened earlier in the day. I had planned on trying to get some sleep, but as soon as I put my head down on the pillow, something crashed in the attic above my room. It was so loud, and the impact made my bed shake a little. Once again, that cold feeling came back, and I could feel my body tensing up, but not freezing like before, just scared, witless. I kept listening to see if I could hear a person or something up there, but nothing happened. I saw the time on the clock was 3:43 a.m. at this point, and decided to make a note of it. A little over 10 minutes later, I heard creaking from above my head, like slow but heavy footsteps, once again in the attic. Then a small thud followed by a scraping sound like a box being dragged across the floor. I covered my ears with my duvet at this point, just wanting it to be over so that I could get some rest and forget all about it. These thuds and scrapes kept happening, just over and over again, like someone was rearranging the things up there. I wondered if I was asleep, so I sent a text to my sister knowing that if I woke up and it was still there, I'd know I wasn't asleep. After about 20 minutes of the noises, they stopped, and I managed to fall asleep pretty quickly, probably because of the events that occurred. The next morning, I woke up to a text chime from my phone. It was my sister. It was a reply to the message I sent her earlier. I didn't bother responding, as I was too busy thinking about what happened. I looked over at the clock to see what time it was, only to see that it was still frozen at 3:43 a.m. It hadn't changed. I knew it was well into morning based off the light, so how did it still read that time? As you can imagine, I could feel the creepiness going up my spine, as I knew that 3 a.m. is known for the time of demonic activity or the witching hour, but I didn't want to jump straight to that conclusion. My sister came into my room about 10 minutes later and asked if I had any batteries, as her clock had stopped in the night too. I was beginning to panic now and asked her what time it stopped at. She said it was at 3:43 a.m. I checked the text I sent her, and you guessed it, 3:43 a.m. It was impossible that I'd sent her that at that time. As I know, it had been at least 20 minutes, if not more, between me checking the clock and texting her. I got straight out of bed and decided to investigate the attic. She saw me pulling down the ladder and asked what I was doing. I gave her a quick rundown of the incidents, the time, the text, and the noise I heard. She's not superstitious, but she was freaked out, so up into the attic I went. I got to the top of the ladder, switched on the light, and just froze. Not a single thing was out of place. Everything was exactly where it was meant to be. These kind of events have happened multiple times now. Every time my sister stops at 3:43 a.m. I came to realize after this had happened about 2 or 3 times that this only happened when I myself was up at 3:43 a.m. My sister and I have experimented to see if it happens when she wakes up, but it only happens to me. I was, and still am, completely stumped as to what the hell is going on. I think I may have annoyed some kind of entity in the house. So yeah, pretty spooky, and unexplainable if you ask me. But I'd be happy to hear what you make of these events. Twice now, I've had a weird experience in the same place, my grandma's attic. Once a few years ago, and just 5 minutes ago the second time. Let me start with the prequel. To give you an idea, my grandma has a house, and the attic is basically like a second floor over the whole house. It's filled with all sorts of things we dump up there that we no longer need. Tools, firewood, old toys from childhood. Also up there is a short chair and a coffee table. When I take them out of the attic to the balcony, it's my favorite place to smoke in the house. Tobacco, not weed. I like the view and the wind. Sometimes though I'm lazy to bring things out and smoke in the attic, just looking around at all the junk. One day I was going up there, and as soon as I stepped foot on the first step, I got a fight or flight response for seemingly no reason. It was the middle of the day, and I had been in the attic 1,000 times. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not a kid. But for some reason I was getting chills, and my heart was beating fast. As soon as I went up the last step, I stopped and looked around the attic. I had nothing to be afraid of, it's just instinct. I couldn't go into the attic without checking it out first, and I spent about 30 seconds looking into the attic in silence before the courage came back and walked forward. While walking towards the table for some reason, I had the thought enter my brain that a demon is watching me right now. I instantly laughed it off and thought to myself, I'll show him who's boss. As soon as I finished that thought, I heard a loud shuffle, like someone's footsteps dragged onto the ground, and instantly I froze midway and looked into the direction where it came from. I spent at least a minute just looking, frozen, expecting a large rat or something to pop out from somewhere. When I finally got my courage back, as soon as I was about to continue to the table and finally do what I came for, another loud noise froze me. This time a distorted piano played. I kid you not, the most demonic, out-of-tune chord you could imagine, like the sound a horror movie producer would put on a jump scare. On cue, I of course immediately dashed towards the stairs and noped the hell out of there. I went downstairs, entered the room my family was in, and tried my best to pretend I wasn't running from a demon. My mother heard the piano. She thought I found my childhood toys and was fooling around with them. I went with that story and told her that surprisingly the batteries were still holding out. They must be good. I wasn't about to tell my family I seriously thought there was a demon in the attic. After I spent a few minutes downstairs, regaining my composure, I started to think about things rationally again. I felt ashamed that I got scared of nothing. I'm an adult, damn it. I pick up my small balls and went up there again, determined to find the piano and ease my mind forever. I went up immediately, walked up to the place where the sound came from, and picked up off the wall a big garbage bag filled with toys from my childhood. I started taking things out and found it, a cheap Chinese dingy toy piano. I tried pressing the keys but no sound came from them. I flipped it around, opened the battery compartment, and had a brain fart when I saw there were no batteries in it. I took it down with me, found some batteries and put them in and tried playing it. Still no sound. Unfortunately, I failed to ease my mind. Over the next few weeks, I spent quite some time reflecting on that incident. As time went on, I started rationalizing it more and more, thinking that maybe pianos like that make their final sound when their circuit board finally dies, kind of like parting words. Maybe the shuffle I heard was my own feet because of the fear it sounded like someone else's. The only thing I couldn't make sense of was how this piano had been in that garbage bag for 15 years and somehow found the energy without batteries to make a sound from its speakers, and a loud one at that. I even posted here at one point, hoping someone could ease my mind and offer an explanation. In the end, as time went on, I brushed it off and told myself, I'm no engineer, I don't know how currents and stuff work. There could be weird ways that it happened and it was just normal, and a coincidence with an explanation. I went to the attic countless times after, and nothing ever happened. No weird sounds, no unexplained paranoia, just peace and quiet. As it should be. Well, that is of course right until today. Recently we've been doing construction work on the house every weekend. I go up to the attic 20 times a day to fetch something or to have a smoke break. We finished the work and went to bed. Now before you accuse me of being a skeptic rationalizer, I try to keep an open mind. Recently, I've been getting into trying out astral projection. It's a nice little meditation, and I haven't succeeded yet, but the effects are quite trippy and it's fun. So I'm laying in bed, browsing the AP subreddit before I decide I'm going to go up and have one last cigarette before I go to bed. The front door is loud, and I don't smoke in the house, so I go to the attic. In the exact same way, as soon as I set foot on the first stair, I get this immense feeling of something is amiss. Now some years have passed since the last time this happened, and naturally my small balls have grown at least a bit, so I don't stop this time. Just went up and sat on my smoke table. I lit my cigarette, remember the last time this happened in the piano. Like any sane person, I started a monologue in my head to banish the potential ghost. My monologue continued until my cigarette went out. Here's a recreation. I don't know if there's demons up here or whatnot, but you can't spook me. I can't touch you right now. But I'm learning this technique that lets me come into your house. Trust me, tonight I'm going to kill you. as revenge for when you scared me. This is your last chance to scare me, so go ahead and try." I put up my cigarette, quite amused with my little monologue, and here we go again. As soon as I finished my monologue and said, "Try me," a loud sound as something on my left drags across the floor. This time I caught it with my peripheral. As I turn around, a sack filled with dry sticks for the fireplace was moving across the floor, defying the laws of physics. Gravity can't do that, can't make it move that distance, especially when there's so much friction that it made a loud sound. I shot up and stayed fixated on the sack, convinced not to let a rat, for example, run away without me seeing it. It didn't move for a few seconds, so I went up to it, took all the sticks out, checked every corner of that thing. No rats inside. I put the sticks back, said out loud, "Don't touch that again." I said my piece already and I meant it. If there really was an evil entity up there, I'm gonna banish it. Although at that point, I was starting to feel like I was bluffing. I walked up to the stairs, but before I went down, I stopped and looked back at the attic. Although my knees were weak, arms heavy, and vomit on my sweater already, I wasn't going to give in to my fear, so I stared into the void for a few seconds to establish dominance. And again, as if a reply, the sack lightly got dragged. This time, just a little bit, for a split second, and I spent a few more seconds looking at it, then slowly went down the stairs with a confident, albeit shaky walk. Originally, I was going to go to bed, but the adrenaline got so high that I'm sitting on the toilet sharing this with all of you. I don't think I can ever rationalize this. It's just too many things on top of each other. The strong fight or flight before the event, the timing that makes this feel like a reply, the hard-to-explain sound and movement. I know there are a lot of skeptics out there, but I'd appreciate some guesses as to what could have happened. I'm now a believer and can't over-rationalize things by myself anymore. I don't know if this spirit is good or bad, so I won't make any extra measures right now. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I'm just going to go upstairs again in a moment to smoke one more cigarette and feel out the vibe. Almost 30 years ago, I was spending several months in Western Europe and staying in a former monastery built in the 17th century. Very early on during my stay, I was warned by one of the girls who worked there to stay away from certain areas of the building, or at least not to go there by myself. When I asked why, she said none of them ever went there alone, because often they would see black figures staring at them from the end of the hallway. While I have always loved ghost stories, I have never seen one and wasn't too bothered by what she told me. In fact, I actually wanted to go to that area to see if I could catch something. Spoiler alert, I never saw anything there or anywhere else in the building. But that didn't mean nothing happened. I spent several months in there, but it was only after I left that I started to realize something was wrong. Many things happened there, but if I were to tell you all of them, I'd have a book. You see, I changed while I was there. I started hearing my name being called constantly by a voice I didn't recognize. Not only that, I couldn't even tell if it was male or female. Nothing else was said, only my name called. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. Oftentimes, I would hear people playing billiards, and I would head out to see where the billiard table was, only to find the room deserted and the balls put away, so no one had been playing. As soon as I walked away, I would almost immediately hear the sound of play, which I knew couldn't be so, as I had been there moments before. Funny thing is that at the time I didn't think anything of it. Not of my name being called, not of the fancied billiard game. The attic in the building was huge, and it had been turned into a library. There was a brand new heating system and heavy new insulation installed too. I would go there to get away from people and to read. At first there was nothing unusual, and I could be there for hours with no one else bothering me. But soon that would change. I started feeling as if someone was standing behind me, but I looked everywhere and no one was there. Soon I started hearing strange knocking noises behind me, and the room became so cold I could see my own breathing steaming. I checked the heat, and it was fine, but I felt more and more uncomfortable there. I felt unwelcome, but I still went there until one day, when I went up the stairs, and even though it was open, I felt I was unable to pass the threshold. There was nothing blocking my way, and yet I couldn't pass no matter how hard I pushed. I tried for about 10 minutes and finally gave up. I never went into the attic again. Weird thing about this place, it was the place where I never heard my name being called. I could probably write a book, like I said, about all the experiences that happened. The thing is, I never wanted to leave. I left the place 30 years ago, and although I didn't hear my name being called, I know it wants me to go back. It just sits there, waiting. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's set of stories. I usually like doing basement around the same time as attic, but I didn't have enough for today's, for any time soon, to be honest. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please don't forget to let me know down below. That makes a hell of a lot of difference to me, as the algorithm really enjoys comments for some reason. It's always nice. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names are on screen, of course, and if you'd like your name on screen, and all the prizes that I mentioned at the start, stickers, letter from me, and all the exclusive content you can find on Patreon itself, just follow the link at the top of the description to go check that out. I'm going to tell you, making the sticker sheet was a lot harder than you might expect, not just like insert, sticker shape and job done. It requires a lot of planning and thinking and moving stuff around and everything. So for those of you who get it, I really hope that you like it, because a lot of work went into it. You'd be surprised how much work goes into pretty much everything on this channel. A lot of stuff happening in the background. But that's enough from me. Thank you so much for being with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed. And if you want more, here are some links here on the screen for you to watch in case you do. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.